Commissioner Jorgensen, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Fatih Birol, head of the International Energy Agency. A question to you both, and perhaps we can start with you, Commissioner. You both said, do not make a mistake to assume that a ceasefire in Iran would immediately and automatically take us to pre-war conditions, because this will have long-term ramifications. This week you have been proven right, because we've seen, again, major volatility in the energy market. Where do we go from here, knowing we're about to enter the summer season? Where do we go from here?
Well, so first of all, in this tragic situation, we do need to still underline that the prices are high, yes, but we are not in a security of supply crisis yet. We are monitoring the situation very closely, and we are working with member states in the Union to do as much as we can to prevent that we get in a situation where indeed we will lack jet fuel or maybe even diesel.
And just to pick up on this point, so your message for Europeans who, again, they look at prices at the pump and they're going, oh God, here we go again. And European companies is, we are not in a situation of panic yet. We can handle the summer.
Well, first of all, we should never be in a situation of panic. I would say panic is not a good place to be. But we are in a very serious situation. And I'm not telling people or companies or businesses or decision makers not to be worried. There is, unfortunately, reason to be worried. But we can act, and we will act. One of the things that I am arguing, that we in the Commission are arguing, and that Fatih Birol is supporting, is we really need to do whatever we can to electrify our economies as fast as we can. Because there's many things we can do to be independent of fossils. Many of them takes years, but electrification is something that you can do and that will have an immediate effect.
Well, the Europeans have also said they will not pay for passage, but as it stands, do you now begin to factor a scenario in which, and I know it's extreme, but do you think $100 a barrel oil is possible? What numbers are you looking at in terms of your new scenarios?
Yeah. It is, there are so many uncertainties, but the uncertainties are not related to energy sector. It is related to the politics and what is happening in the conflict over there. If Hormuz is closed again, we may see upward pressure on the prices with significant implications on the economies.
And you have a number in mind? Is in your conversations with the Commissioner, did you say be prepared to this level?
I don't need to tell the Commission is always well prepared, but I can tell you that the entire world should be prepared for the worst case, which we hope will not materialize, but we really need to be prepared for this worst case scenario.
And what does worst case mean?
If the Hormuz is closed again.
And prices go up to a particular level? Where do you see a trigger point?
If you push the prices up, today it is $75 and so on, and it may really push the price up if the Hormuz Strait is closed once again.
And that there's a point in which the both of you agree, and that is there's a question of energy security. Europe needs energy security, and it needs to be able to produce homegrown energy.
Sure.
At this point, how do we make that a reality? Because for a lot of Europeans, they'll say, ever since the war in Ukraine started, there is no energy security in Europe.
On one hand, that is true. We are way too dependent on fossils. We import for more than 370 billion euros worth of fossils every year. That number will be much higher this year because we've paid more than 50 billion more for our energy already this year because of the crisis. So there's still a long way to go. On the other hand, I will say, since February 22, we've reduced our consumption of gas overall by around 20%. That's made a huge difference. We've deployed far more renewables, so we save billions every year. That's not to say that the prices are not still too high. They are, but they would have been far, far higher had we not done these things.
And Mr. Birol, you told me clearly the Europeans had created a dependency on Russia that turned out to be very painful and also very expensive. And you also said going back to Vladimir Putin and knocking on the door would be an equally bad mistake. At this point, is there your message for the EU, but also the G7, that they need to go harder on the sanctions? This is the time.
I think Europe made a historic mistake in the 1970s when there was oil crisis, 1973 and 1979, oil crisis, and it had major implications for European economy at that time. And the Europeans thought it is wrong to have over-reliance on Middle East, that diagnosis, But the solution, they said, now we pivot to Russia, over-reliance on Russia. So right diagnosis, wrong solution. And we suffer a lot in Europe for the over-reliance on Russia after we learn our lesson after the cutting of the Russian gas. And our economies and our businesses, households did suffer for the high energy prices. But once you make is a mistake, but if you do it 2 times, it is not a mistake. It is what I told the European policymakers.
Just to make this very clear, we are not considering opening up again for Russian energy, on the contrary.
And you're not considering that, but nonetheless, there is an active conversation about the oil price cap as it stands. There is a possibility, right now it's set at about $44 a barrel. Of course, the price cap usually tends to be 15% below market average. The prices have gone up. Is there a question, or is there a scenario in which this price cap does not get renewed?
First of all, I think we need to have as strict sanctions as we can, including price cap. But I just want to say also to the viewers that maybe not understand the nuances of this. The big part of this, which is that we are banning now import of Russian gas, that stands. And it's important to say because sometimes we hear voices, even in Europe, saying, in this very difficult situation, shouldn't we reconsider? But no, that would be a huge mistake, as Mr. Barol said.
What is the key now for Europe to be able to have homegrown energy at an affordable price? Because what companies in across Europe continue to say is competing on the energy front with the U.S., which is pretty much self-reliant, and the Chinese, is very difficult.
It is not industry, but the entire economy here. There is an economic competition between, of course, US, Europe, Middle East, India, China. And here, in my view, Europe tomorrow cannot suddenly discover oil or gas. If there was oil and gas in Europe, we would have already discovered many years ago. So important thing is to produce energy as much as possible at home. Domestic energy, not to rely on other countries. So here, the main option we have is electrification. We have to electrify our energy, our economy as much as possible, which means more electric cars, more heat pumps, industry more electrified. And because we can generate the renewables, solar, wind, also nuclear power and others at home here, and therefore we reduce our vulnerabilities vis-à-vis what is happening in this country, that country, as much as possible. In my view, this should be at the center of the European energy strategy.
And I very much agree. Basically it's about getting the expensive black molecules, the gas and the oil and the coal, out of our system, and instead have green electrons. So electrification is at the core of this. And I think it's been overlooked in the discussion until now, unfortunately. So next week we will, from the Commission side, put forward a strategy that will really boost electrification in Europe.
And that was my question. How do you make that a reality?
This is about deploying a whole range of different measures. And it's about looking at different sectors. It's mobility, so transport. It's housing and buildings, and it's industry. It's taxes, yes. It's transmission costs. It's something very physical, like the grids that need to be expanded fast. That means faster permitting times. And
Mr. Barol, would you agree to that? And what do you say to criticism that electrification is great, but if you look at numbers, the speed, the velocity in terms of the infrastructure, it's not moving, certainly not when you look at the tone and the language that suggests urgency to the level it should?
I would definitely agree to those points. We are far in Europe behind the countries like Japan or Korea or China who don't have a lot of oil and gas resources. They put electrification at the center of their strategies. In Europe, we should make the electricity prices affordable for the people so that the consumers, the households, the industry should go for cheaper option. They will not go for electricity because it is clean. They will go for electricity because it is cheap. Therefore, we should look how we set the electricity prices, how we tax the electricity prices.
So price incentive.
Price incentives and also regulatory measures. I give you one number, which is really very hurting for me. Last year, 85 gigawatts of renewables added to the European electricity system. Big number, but 600 gigawatts, almost 7 times of that, renewable projects finished, because there was no grid to bring it to the homes and to the industry. They were waiting like this. So this is really an economic crime, if I may say so. So therefore, I fully support the Commissioner, put the grids, building good grids for the European energy system.
Ultimately, we've talked about this for many months now. What's going to break the wheel, ultimately?
I think the issue is with the European leaders and the finance ministers too, in order to give incentives. If we leave everything to the markets, it will not happen. We should intervene, we should give incentives, price incentives and subsidies in different cases in order to incentivize the consumers.
Can I also just add to that? I'm certainly not the one to neglect the challenge and the problem. On the contrary, I'm here to say, listen, this is a wake-up call. But things are actually moving in the right direction. We have a record number of electric vehicles being sold these months. Even in a country like Germany, they're now selling more electric vehicles than combustion engine cars. We have a record number of individual households now using heat pumps as a heat source. All of these things are going fast, but not fast enough. Now, on the grids part, we need to have more investments, yes, and we need to have more physical infrastructure, yes, but we also need to use what we have more flexible. And that can be done in a smarter way. So when we combine this with storage, for instance, with AI, with digitalization, not only can we expand the use of what we already have, we can also bring down the prices that way, because it means that we will use the energy when it's cheapest.
And you've talked about proposals that the Commission would put forward. Obviously, you're fighting hard for this politically, too. Is it your sense that some member states just simply say, it's nice, but my business is nuclear, and this is just not my priority as it stands?
To be honest, no. I do actually think that there is a shared analysis, and there's a shared also willingness to move forward faster than what we're doing now. Of course, there's differences between some countries. Some are focusing on nuclear, some are focusing more on renewables, some are focusing on both. But electrification that we are talking about today is necessary both for nuclear and for renewables. So this is also why we are arguing, Dr. Borrell and I, listen, let's move forward with the electrification part as fast as we can.
So you don't believe there's a single member state? Of course, there's big nuclear countries like France that is the core of their energy strategy that may not be as keen. You don't feel that your work is in a way being slowed down by the politics?
Not at all. I think that even, I do acknowledge, of course, there's a big discussion between renewables and nuclear. Of course there is. But on electrification, those electrons, whether or not they're from nuclear or they're from renewables, they still need the cables and they still need the grids. And in that sense, I think there's common ground. What I will say, and where I would like a little bit more urgency, is that, as you said, we've been speaking about this for months. We have put forward a grids plan that will help spark this transition. It's being negotiated now. I'm urging member states and the European Parliament, let's do this, let's finalize these negotiations as fast as possible.
In Europe, we like to discuss the things a lot. Maybe
Very
sometimes too much, sometimes, sometimes not so much. Some of those discussions most of them are useful, some of them are less useful. In my view, I work on this issue energy since some time. One of the least useful discussion in Europe we have is it renewables or nuclear? We need both of them as much as possible because we need a lot of electricity in Europe. This is our independence, this is our sovereignty.
Can I also say that if we are honest about what are the real priorities out there in member states, very often that will not be the real discussion. The discussion out there with the finance ministries and with the parliaments will be, we need some money to invest. We see it's necessary, we need it fast. But where's that money going to come from? What we've proposed in the next MFF, so the next long-term budget, is to say on the Connecting Europe energy facility, where we pay for interconnectors, pay to integrate Europe better in the energy system that will bring down prices and make this transition possible, we are allocating 5 times more money than we have in this present.
Is that enough?
That is 5 times more than what we have now, what we're already doing good, I think is very ambitious, and I very much hope that will be deployed. Now, is it enough to pay everything? Of course not. But nobody is arguing, at least I'm not, and I would argue against, that it's public money that pays everything. Of course not. We need private investments. So it's also about de-risking private investments. In something like grids, these are long-term investments. So let's find ways of attracting more institutional investors.
And just as a final point on this, the European Union used to present itself, and perhaps, Commissioner, you still want to say you still are, as a green champion. Green is now becoming clean. When you look at the European Union, Dr. Burrell, would you say you need additional flexibilities? Yes, some of this regulation perhaps is too stringent. Or do you say, on balance, if you take out the politics, it's really not that tilted?
Yeah. Energy is a good thing. We need energy for everything, for our to go to work, for our economy, and for the lives and everything. But how do we produce this energy, and what are the implications of that is the key issue. So therefore, in Europe, we need a lot of energy, especially electricity, which is affordable and reliable and also clean. And electricity provides all of these components, especially if it comes from the renewables, nuclear and others. And Europe can do it. We did many good things in the past.
And this energy regulation, green regulation, climate regulation, you don't believe that is a problem?
I think European leaders, like the Mr. Commissioner, will put all of them together. There are trade-offs here and there, of course. In a pragmatic way, we have to find out the electricity way, and electricity is the future of Europe.
And the good news is that really, yes, there can be trade-offs, as Dr. Burrell mentions, but in most of the cases, it'll be the opposite. It'll be actually the same solutions that we need to become more independent, to lower prices, that we need to fight climate change. And I'm glad you asked it, because I personally also think that we speak too little about climate change. It cannot be that we only speak about it when there's heat waves and forest fires. Climate change is real, it's here. We need to do more to tackle that problem.
And to that, there's still the question of the climate regulation. We've seen from a number of member states say this is extraordinary times, perhaps we need more flexibility. When you look overall at the regulation you have in place, is there a fair point to say some aspects will have to be tweaked?
Oh, no, and certainly not because other countries outside of the EU ask for it. Including the US. But what we will do is, of course, be as pragmatic as we can in implementation. There will be tweaks, and of course we'll have to do things differently. But as long as we stay on track, and as long as the targets are still the same, and we promise to our citizens and companies that we will in fact do this, then I think we can be proud.
I would also say that Mr. Commissioner, pragmatism is the right word here. Flexibility is the right word here. We should energy security of Europe is very important, but Europe's regulations are important as well. We have been flexible and pragmatic here, because we had a major gas crisis in Europe, and Mr. Commissioner and the Commission has decided to 2027, next year, nullify the imports from Russia. So we have to be very careful here and pragmatic.
Energy efficiency concerns me more because we're not on track when we look at what's actually happening in the member states. So what does that mean? Should we then just lower the standards? No. What we're doing instead is saying, okay, how can we then help make that happen? And actually, the electrification strategy is also about becoming more energy efficient, because almost always when you electrify, that will also mean that you're using the energy more efficiently.
And just as a final question, if I may, under a minute, what's the biggest lesson that you take away from what has been really a whirlwind 6 months, Mr. Commissioner?
That we cannot be dependent on fossil fuels. Instead of buying energy and using it and buying it and using it and be dependent on whatever happens geopolitically in the world, we should have our own homegrown energy. Yes, it'll need investments. Yes, it'll need political ambition. But these things can be done. And if we do that, then in the future we'll have cheaper energy, we'll fight climate change, and we will be more independent.
And Mr. Burrell, hectic 6 months. What do you take away from this? What's the lesson you draw from it?
It is the world is getting dangerous by day, and the energy security is getting more important. And energy security is like national security. So I think we must, in Europe, produce energy as much as possible at home. And we need to produce a lot of electricity. And when we import energy, we have to work with the countries that we trust and get the energy from those countries.
Well, as always, thank you to the both of you for joining us on Euronews.
Thank
you.